it just me, or did we take a time machine back to the 80s, but only for car design? Look around, sharp edges, boxy silhouettes, and futuristic vibes straight out of an old sci-fi movie. The Hyundai Envision 74's screaming retro curves, the Cybertruck's angular insanity, the DeLorean Alpha 5 flexing like it's Back to the Future all over again. What the hell's going on? Are car designers stuck in a VHS time loop? Or is this nostalgia trip hiding something even bigger? Let's break it down. The rise of retrofuturism. See, back in the day, the 80s weren't just about big hair and questionable fashion choices. It was a decade obsessed with the future. A neon-lit, synth-heavy, angular utopia where everything looked like it belonged in an arcade game. Cars weren't just machines, they were rolling visions of progress. Sharp edges, wedge-shaped silhouettes, pop-up headlights, because nothing says cutting edge like headlights that do a little peekaboo before illuminating the road. Fast forward to today, and designers have decided that the best way to move forward is by going backward. We're seeing a resurgence of blocky shapes, light bars that scream, "This car belongs in Tron," and interiors that look like they were designed by a guy who thinks a Casio calculator watch is peak technology. Ever wondered why cars like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, Tesla Cybertruck, and DeLorean Alpha 5 look like they belong in a synthwave album cover? Because they do! Movies like Blade Runner and Tron gave us a version of the future that was slick, dystopian, and dripping in neon. The cars? Cold, sharp, aggressive, like they were built for high-speed chases through rainy cyberpunk cityscapes. And today, designers are tapping into that nostalgia. Because, let's be honest, who doesn't want to feel like they're living in a sci-fi movie when they pull out of a Costco parking lot? And of course, there's synthwave culture, which basically grabbed the entire aesthetic of the 80s, slapped a vaporwave filter on it, and turned it into a whole mood. Car companies have been paying attention. They've realized that people don't want cars that look like generic blobs. They want something with character. Something that looks like it belongs in a video game cutscene, narrated by a guy with a raspy voice and an eye patch. Automakers are playing the nostalgia card. So we've established that retrofuturism is running the show. Modern cars look like they time traveled from an 80s sci-fi flick because, well, that's the aesthetic everyone's vibing with. But here's the kicker. Automakers aren't just borrowing the look of the past, they're straight up reviving the icons. It's not enough for a car to feel like it belongs in Blade Runner. It has to remind you of that one poster you had on your bedroom wall as a kid. If there's one thing car companies have figured out, it's that nostalgia is a cheat code for sales. Slap a familiar shape on a new car, throw in a few design cues that make people say, "Hey, that kinda looks like that car from my childhood." And boom, you've got a hit. And let's be real, automakers are milking this strategy harder than an 80s action hero milks a one-liner before blowing something up. Take the Hyundai Envision 74, for example. That thing looks like it drove straight out of Cyberpunk 2077 and into our reality. But plot twist, it's actually a modern homage to Hyundai's 1974 Pony Coupe. That's right, Hyundai, the company best known for making rental fleet staples in the early 2000s, is now out here reviving its cool factor from an era when nobody even knew Hyundai had one. And people love it. Then there's the Lancia Delta, back from the dead in electric form. Lancia, a brand that was basically on life support, finally figured out that people don't want bland, forgettable cars. They want rally legends reimagined for the modern world. The Delta was the hot hatchback of its time, and now it's coming back because, let's face it, Italian car with rally pedigree is way more exciting than another soulless EV with an iPad glued to the dash. And how could we forget the DeLorean? The original Back to the Future time machine was a complete flop when it was new, underpowered, overpriced, and doomed by scandal. But throw 40 years of pop culture love at it, and add some sci-fi nostalgia, and suddenly DeLorean is back with the Alpha 5. It doesn't even need a flux capacitor. Nostalgia alone is powerful enough to drive sales. So why are car companies so obsessed with bringing back old-school designs? Because the people buying cars now, millennials and Gen Xers, grew up idolizing these machines. These are the kids who had Lamborghini Countach posters on their bedroom walls, played Outrun in the arcade, and watched Michael Knight talk to his car like it was his best friend. They don't want soulless transportation pods. They want something that makes them feel something. Car companies aren't stupid. They know that the best way to sell a car in 2025 is to make it look like it came from 1985. And judging by the hype around these retro-inspired revivals, it's working. The 80s wedge shape versus today's aerodynamics. It's easy to think car designers are just playing the nostalgia game, dusting off old blueprints and cashing in on childhood memories. But here's the plot twist. They're not just copying the 80s because it looks cool. They're doing it because it actually works. Yeah, believe it or not, the boxy yet sleek aesthetic of the 80s actually made sense aerodynamically. Those wedge-shaped Lamborghinis, low-slung sports cars, and cyberpunk-esque silhouettes weren't just designed to look futuristic. They were actually cutting through the air better than you'd think. And in today's world where every car is obsessed with efficiency because EVs need every extra mile of range they can get, guess what? Those 80s angles still work. Look at modern electric cars and tell me you don't see the resemblance. The Tesla Cybertruck? It looks like someone remastered a DeLorean in 4K. But the sharp angles actually help with airflow and structural integrity. The Hyundai Ioniq 5? It's practically a pixelated time machine that takes cues from the 80s pony, but its aerodynamic shape make it more efficient. Even the Lucid Air, which is all about maximizing range, features a streamlined wedge-like silhouette because the laws of physics don't care what decade we're in. See, modern cars, especially EVs, are all about reducing drag to squeeze out as much range as possible. And as it turns out, those wedge-shaped slant front designs from the 80s were already onto something. Of course, back then, aerodynamics weren't the main reason for the design. Cars just needed to look fast, even when parked. But today, the same shapes that made cars look like they belonged in a synthwave music video now help maximize efficiency in an era of range anxiety and battery limitations. So if you're wondering why new cars have started looking like the 80s greatest hits, it's not just because they were cool, though let's be honest, they totally are. It's because science says they actually work. Will the 80s aesthetic stick around? At this point you might be wondering, are we stuck in the 80s forever? Is every future car going to look like it just rolled off the set of RoboCop? Or is this just a temporary phase, like leg warmers and synth-heavy pop anthems? Well, here's the thing. Automakers love a good trend, but they love money even more. And right now, the 80s aesthetic is selling hard. People are buying into the retro, futuristic, polygonal dream. And as long as that demand exists, car companies will keep churning out cars that look like they belong in a VHS rental store's cool future cars section. But trends evolve. Today it's the 80s. Tomorrow, maybe we move into the 90s. And you know what that means? Jelly bean-shaped cars, swoopy curves, and plastic cladding galore. Picture a world where the Chrysler Concorde is considered peak design again, where every car looks like it was inspired by a Tamagotchi, and where two-tone paint jobs make a glorious comeback. It sounds ridiculous, but so did the idea of Hyundai bringing back the Pony Coupe, and yet here we are. The real question is, how long can nostalgia keep driving design? At some point, automakers will need to innovate beyond the past or risk making the same mistake as Hollywood, rebooting the same idea over and over until nobody cares anymore. Will we still be obsessed with wedge-shaped cars and pixelated taillights in 2035, or will designers have moved on, leaving the 80s behind like a forgotten cassette tape? If history tells us anything, it's this. Car design is cyclical. The 80s are back now, but eventually the tide will turn. So enjoy your synthwave dream while it lasts, because before you know it, we'll be debating whether a Pontiac Aztek revival was a good idea. But hey, what do you think? Which retro-futuristic car is your favorite? Are you Team Wedge, or are you already praying for the jelly bean car of the 90s to take over? Drop your pics in the comments. And if this really is what the future looks like, well, time to dig up that old VHS player, throw on some synthwave, and embrace that neon glow.